what are the main sort of takeaway technical changes that you've spotted on the MCL35M?
Obviously, we know that there's the switch to Mercedes, and that's had a big knock-on effect to the rear of the car. As we know, every team has been allotted 2 tokens, which they may spend on a certain area of the car. Certain areas require a certain amount of tokens to develop. The rear half of the chassis takes 2, so McLaren seems to have kind of spent its allowance on developing that area of the car, trying to get as much bang for its buck as it can, because, you know, switching to the Mercedes engine, but obviously if it can improve things there as well, then that's what it's got to do. Let's start at the front end though, which is relatively the same as last year. They introduced the Mercedes style nose, if you like, in practice at Mugello, and they carried that forward. And I think part of the thinking behind that was because obviously that requires a crash structure change to change, and that requires tokens. And so if they could do it, they could enact that in the middle of the season, then they wouldn't have to spend it going forward for this season. It hit them a little bit hard when the new updates first came out, but they got it together at the end of the season, got 3rd place in the Constructors' Championship. So obviously these changes did eventually bear fruit. But I think the key thing is, as I've mentioned, the tokens have been spent on the rear of the chassis. The Mercedes engine is not like the Renault power unit. It's a different architecture, it's a different layout, and they've got to not just consider the mounting points on the chassis, but cooling requirements as well. And these will have a knock-on effect on how the chassis is developed. So that's something they've had to consider. I think the most obvious showing of that is the change of the shape in the air intake, which probably isn't massively exciting, but they last year had something of a Darth Vader mask kind of design, which was it's incredibly strange design, if you like, but it's a lot more conventional this time. It falls in line with what Mercedes has. Every power unit has different cooling requirements and different architecture, as I mentioned, and so getting the right cooling to the right parts and the right amount of cooling is ideal. So that's why they've gone in that direction. And obviously fitting the Mercedes power unit into the back as well, that's something of a change. So you'll see that the bodywork is sculpted in a different way. If you looked at Racing Point and Williams and Mercedes as well last year, you'd see that they'd have that sloping design on the top of the sideboards. And that's just to simply allow air to drop down and on top of the floor. And if you build... you're allowing high pressure air to go on top of the floor, and if you're building that pressure difference, you're getting the diffuser to work harder. Now, as we know, another knock-on effect of these regulations is the diffuser is less potent this time around. They've had 50mm lopped off the internal fences, and so getting that diffuser to work as hard as it can is absolutely vital. And so trying to get that clean airflow to the back of the car, that's going to be so important in this iteration of the regulations. Another thing that we do know as well is the floors have changed, and McLaren has sort of given us a glimpse of what it might look like, but I think they're keeping their cards close to the chest on that one. If you look at it, it's very, very pared down, let's say. It's quite simplistic, and we saw designs in practice at the end of last year that were a lot more complex, it would be fair to say. So perhaps, again, they're keeping something up their sleeve, they're keeping their cards close to their chest on that one, because this might be an area of not intense development as such, but if a team has a really good idea for that and is able to make up any ground that they've lost, because they've lost all of these toys at the rear end, all of the slots and all of the cuts, if they can make that up with what they do have available to them, it'll be a very lucrative area of development. So I think they're trying to sort of, play expectations down on that front. And just at the rear as well, the rear wing end plate is brand new. If you'd seen that curved strake design, it's something that Haas invented, which is something that we don't say a whole lot on this channel, but it's something they invented in 2019. It's something that Red Bull ran with as well in 2020. So it's an interesting inclusion. It'd be interesting to see how that works with the rest of the car. So there's to summarise, a few new bits that we can see. I think there are more to come, but as a continuation, it looks like a very, very sensible development of McLaren, perhaps what we were expecting almost.
And Jake, you mentioned the nose, sort of Mercedes-style nose that McLaren have been using the end of last season. The difference now with the air intake being shaped differently and the side pod undercuts being, more in a Mercedes style. Is it too simplistic to say it's now a papaya Mercedes?
I think so, yeah. I think you have to consider that it is trying to fit the Mercedes power unit architecture in, and there's only so many ways you can skin a cat. And the key thing is getting everything to work and doing it in a way that is proven. And so by taking these design cues, that it's a proven design. The shape of the air intake delivers the right mass flow rate of air to the engine and things like that. The front end as well. I think that's something that's just become a trend as well. We saw a couple of teams gravitate towards that last season. I wouldn't be surprised if more teams did it over the off season. So perhaps yes, perhaps a little bit simplistic, but obviously if you're taking design cues from the team that's won the last 7 Constructors' Championships, it's probably not a bad idea.
And Jake, just going back to what you mentioned about the changes to the floor, as you say, appreciate that McLaren probably playing its cards very close to its chest, as all teams seem to do at this time of year, understandably, of course, given, I think, as I read in your feature for autosport.com plus, Formula One's essentially chest at 200 miles an hour. But do you think it's given any indication of what we might see from the rest of the teams, or will they all likely take a sort of understated approach to their launch images and then maybe try and get something a bit more like we saw what Ferrari and Haas were running in practice for races at the end of last year?
Well, I think with the teams that have already run, even if it's not a full 2021 floor, a facsimile thereof, I don't think they have anything to hide by putting them on their launch cars, because it's public domain at this point. It's no secret. But although McLaren had tried one quite early on earlier on than those teams in the season, it was a very sort of simplistic 2021 floor. Some of the things that we've seen from other teams has been little curls, little fins, little bits and pieces to what it seems to be doing, at least anyway, to my eye, is there is now a focus on driving airflow inwards rather than outwards, because you simply have less space to do that. You can't try and divert it outwards further because you have this big rear tyre in the way that's really ruining your airflow. And so to try and protect the diffuser, which is so important, I'd suggest it's the part of the car that probably generates the most downforce if you get it right. You need to protect that. You need to ensure that no dirty air is getting into that, no turbulence is getting into that, or otherwise you're quite simply ruining the expansion that the diffuser needs to produce to work. So if you're able to do that, if you're able to create a seal with what you have available to you on the floor, then that's going to really yield some extra performance. So perhaps McLaren playing it a little bit safe because they don't want to show off all their toys just yet. We'll have to wait and see.